by NTA.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Thank you for staying with us. And now to our focus for the day, which borders on the role of observers in election monitoring, especially as the 2019 elections is less than 40 days away. To set a tone for our discussion, let's take this background report put together by Kunle Adeyeye.
Election monitoring involves observation of the electoral process by independent bodies. The aim is to assess the standard of the exercise and suggest possible ways of improving on its credibility. Elections in Nigeria have always been monitored by local and international observers, and with Nigeria's general elections just a few weeks away, it is expected that different observers will be on ground to appraise the polls. The purpose of accrediting observers for elections remains a noble exercise intended to increase the transparency of the process and equally serve as a useful feedback mechanism for strengthening the electoral process. The electoral umpire, the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC), has, however, reviewed its guidelines as regards accreditation of observers ahead of the general elections in February. The electoral body has turned down applications by some suspected support groups of candidates contesting the 2019 general elections to monitor the elections. It says only neutral observers would be accredited. On the sub-regional level, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, says it is sending a 200-member observer team to Nigeria for the 2019 general elections. The African Union has also said it will deploy both short and long-term election observer mission to monitor the 2019 general elections in Nigeria. Is the step taken by INEC to streamline observers in the right direction, or the gate should be left opened to all and sundry? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria are waiting to provide answers.
Thank you for staying with us. And we have our guests join us in the studio to discuss this crucial issue. And let's start by introducing Dr. Abubakar Kari. He's a lecturer at the University of Abuja. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And joining us also is Rauf Salami. He's an election analyst of the ECOWAS Observation Mission to Nigeria. We're pleased to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you. Good morning.
All right, gentlemen, it's indeed nice to have you join us this morning on this program. Now, many international organizations are involved in election monitoring. The AU, the EU, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and of course the Organization of American States. And one wonders what actually is the role of election observers globally. And I'd like to begin with a man from ECOWAS.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank you for this opportunity to discuss electoral assistance and particularly a role of observers, international observers. International observers are trained and deployed to witness, follow various stages of elections and provide a thorough, comprehensive, objective, and partial assessment of a particular process. It's a collective responsibility. As you said, many countries, many organizations are involved, and the main concern is to maintain peace and ensure peaceful transmission of power.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salami. Now let's get to you. You know, elections keeps evolving. The dynamics of elections keep evolving, and election observation is an integral part of election process. Now, from the distribution of material, opening of the polls, voting, accreditation, collation, and announcing of results, what will be your assessment so far of our electoral process, you know, in tune with observations?
Well, let me begin by saying that election observation over the years has become one of the global best practices in democracy. It is a global thing, and it has come to become a norm in both developed and developing democracies. Elections are observed, and several things are observed. And election observation is very, very important in several respects. First and foremost, it increases public confidence in the election, and if and where it is observed diligently and impartially, it tends not to only add public confidence, but also deter a lot of untoward activities that are usually associated or trailed the democratic process. It also measures the credibility or otherwise of a particular poll. And international organizations and indeed international community sometimes relate with certain countries on the basis of how good or bad their election is. So that is why it is very, very important. Election has been observed in Nigeria for a long time, but particularly in this Fourth Republic, the reports have varied. I remember in 2003 and 2007, the aggregate verdict was quite bad. In fact, I remember the European Union describing the 2007 election as the worst that was ever organized anywhere in the world. And this triggered a lot of things afterward. Even the beneficiary of the election, the late President Umaru Musa, yes, came to admit that there are flaws in the election. And he set up the Justice West Committee and charged them with the responsibility of identifying the areas where we had problems. And we have benefited tremendously from the report of the OS panel and the other election observation reports. Therefore, generally, election observation tend to assist countries in order to identify flaws in their democratic process and to address the problems. It also improves the image of the country. For instance, until 2011, it was alleged that every election in Nigeria had been worse than the one before it. But after 2011, because all the identified flaws have been systematically and gradually addressed, we have seen tremendous improvement in our electoral process. And full credit must be given to election observers who identified the problems alongside other stakeholders and interested parties. Therefore, I think with respect to Nigeria, election observers, both domestic and international, have been doing a great job. And I believe in 2019 elections, the trend and pattern are likely going to continue.
Well, it's indeed nice that you recalled the 2007 election and, of course, the EU's report on that, and, of course, the response of the then president, who acknowledged the fact that there were faults here and there. And that brings us to the next question. My colleague Ruth did enumerate the process of election, which begins from the distribution of materials and others. So, Rauf Salami, what should be the scope of this monitoring? Should the observers actually look into all aspects of this process? What should be the scope? Is there any limitations?
Well, there are limitations because, first of all, before you come in the country, you need accreditation. According to the ECOWAS supplementary protocol, there should be a request from the country, but that protocol has been reviewed, so there's no need for a request. It's a deployment which became systematic. Now, in the country, the aim is to cover all the aspects, all the phases of the election, pre-electoral period, election period, post-election period. So for us in ECOWAS, and generally every organization that are part of the Declaration of Principle for International Observation, use the same methodology, more or less. There's a fact-finding mission ahead of the election. In Nigeria, it happened in November, first quarter of November of last year. ECOWAS sent a mission, and a report exists. And this report helped the long-term mission that comes after, which is made of analysts, a core team of analysts, specialists of political, legal, media, conflict prevention, who are going to be a number of 12 for Nigeria election, and 4 analysts for long-term mission. A long-term mission is globally 30 days. Now, if there is postponement or second runoff, then it's a longer period. But for ECOWAS, it's generally 30 days. So during that long-term mission, you have at least 2 weeks in the country, or 3 weeks before election day, where you interact with main stakeholders from the EMB, INEC in this case, and political party, civil society, citizen observers. We collaborate with them enormously because they are on ground. They know the country better than those who are from outside. And we ask questions, we interact to gather information, conduct analysis, and prepare brief for head of mission, who is going to conduct the short-term mission. In Nigeria, the plan is the president of the commission has approved deployment of 200 short-term observers who will be long-term, will be deployed end of January, and short-term is generally a week before election day. 200 observers to cover this massive country and hopefully the 6th geopolitical zone. If in the northeast we have information that we can go, we will go. So is there a limit? Yes, we cannot, 200 will not cover every poll. It's not about poll watch. It's about having a sample of, significant sample of observers to really be able to judge and conclude on whether the process is credible and has integrity and is transparent. And all that is done very professionally with precise methodology and code of conduct for observers. We have to close this methodology, a follow-up mission that comes after the election, because every election observation mission makes recommendation on how to improve the next stage or early alert while the election is happening. So follow-up happens 2 years after the election, depending on the tenure of the country.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Salami. Before we continue with our guest here in Abuja, I would like to introduce a guest via Skype from Lagos, Mr. Idayat Hassan. He is the Director of Center for Democracy and Development. Good morning. Mrs., I beg your pardon. Your name made me think you're a man. I'm so sorry. But thank you for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
let's just hit to you immediately. Now, I guess you've been following up. So what would be your assessment so far if we're talking observations of elections to ensure that everything is in tune with best international practices when we're talking credible and transparent elections, as we look ahead to the 2019 election?
I think now we have moved from talking about free, fair, and credible elections to looking at electoral integrity. Not just on the continent, but all over the world. And when we talk in terms of what comprises the minimum modicum of electoral integrity, we really want to look at pre-election phase, during election, and post-election for us to judge. Because talking about what happened on just 2 days on the election day does not give a full appraisal of the whole electioneering process itself. And that is why most of us talk about election as a process and not just a day activity. And there are different ways in terms of doing this. But as much as we talk in terms of the modicum of what integrity will be, as observers also, it is also important to think in terms of peace and stability post-election.
All right, thank you indeed, Idayat Hassan. But I would like to remain with you, and I'd like to have your own appraisal of the necessity for monitoring in the first instance. Now, what should be the role of election observers? But let's take it from there, because we want to understand what the rules are and what they're expected to do pre, during, and of course post-election, for us to understand really what your rules are in the election process.
Is actually to imbue confidence in the whole process. People are not just observing elections because they just want to observe or they are interlopers, but because they want to make people to trust the process. All the actors, they want citizens to have confidence in that process. So that's the most important role of an observer or any observation mission. And when you look at it, from every part of the elections, from the voter registration exercise itself, that is where you start looking at it, and to be sure that whatever will be put out as the voters register will determine the election itself. I see the confidence in the voters register is more important than any other process that comes up. After the voters register itself, we also look in terms of their own electoral atmosphere. Do we have free media? Do we have equality in terms of media? How has the campaign gone? What about the money that has actually put in place? Have people been intimidated? Are there any attempt at voter suppression? And on election, and of course, the election management body is a very, very key aspect of any observation process. What are they doing? Do they even have necessary resources? It's not just for us to be watchdog over them. It's also to support them and ensure that people come out during the election to come and vote. And if you look at, hello?
All right, madam, we'll return to you in a short while. We'll try to set some things right, technically speaking. And after that, we'll come back to you for further analysis on your own part. Right now, we are back to the studio, and let's return to the lecturer. And a situation where contentious election present fears of vote irregularities or some level of malpractices, what is expected of the observers?
Well, actually, observers have a lot of limitations. Their responsibility in the main does not go beyond observing and filing out their own reports. They are not supposed to interfere in the process, but they carry a lot of moral power, particularly given the fact that a section of them represent international organizations and the international community, which are quite influential. And therefore, whatever that they come out with should be taken very seriously by the election monitoring body and by the government. But the best they can do, if and when they come across an attempt to tamper with the election or the democratic process, of course, is to try to talk to the relevant body. For instance, INEC. It has happened over and again, particularly on election day, where a particular observer at a particular polling unit will come across something untoward. You immediately try to contact INEC and tell them what is going on, with a view for them to quickly address the problem. But they cannot come out to directly intervene or interfere, because their own mission is more or less observation.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kari. Now, let's get back to you, Mr. Salami. If we're looking at the basis for credible elections, it's not just premised, to the election day. There are all other factors in terms of the legal framework, the prevailing political environment, respect for individual rights, and also internal party structure to be in line with the electoral process. Now, if you look at political parties as we look ahead of the 2019 elections, how have they fared so far, if we must ensure credibility and transparency?
Well, so far, the major concern that was raised was during the primaries, an ability on proper handling of primaries by political parties. We all saw what happened, and of course, this needs to be corrected. Now, globally, the country is going in the right direction. Political parties are nominated candidates, irrespective of how it happened. So candidates are ready to compete, and campaign is open. So that's a positive aspect. There are challenges that has been flagged out during the fact-finding missions. Issues on clarity on transmission of results and collation system has not been clarified. We don't know how it's going to be done. So there is a need of clarification. I'll say it's a shared responsibility between those managing the election, administering the election, and political parties, civil society. Every stakeholder has a role to play, and people need to come up and play responsibly for the process to go smoothly and refrain from things that could be unacceptable and hate speech, spread money, vote buying. These are practices that we don't need to see.
Okay, we'll actually get to that in the process, in the process of this conversation. But I hope we have a clear signal now via Skype in Lagos for us to return to the madam there. All right, it's clearer now. Now, let me ask you this. Now, what are the categories of observers for the 2019 elections? That is, if you are aware of it, and of what's, in your opinion, what informed INEC's decision to revise the guidelines for the accreditation of election observers for the 2019 general elections?
For now, of course, we are going to have the international observers like ECOWAS, the African Union, Commonwealth, EU, all of them are coming into the country to observe the elections. Then, of course, we have the domestic observer group, which, of course, in each elections, we might have more than 100 groups. monitoring these elections. But from our previous experience, particularly with the staggered elections also, we are beginning to notice that the observers group, the domestic observer group, are actually compromised. So it's very, very key for INEC to come up with very stringent guidelines for the accreditation of domestic observers ahead of the 2019 elections.
Sorry, Ruth. Are you saying that there's a fear that some local observers may be agents of some political groups, or what?
Yes. So in the recently concluded Osun and Ekiti elections, most of our reports, in fact, the CDD report, emphasized on raising the bar for who an observer really is, because we had people fronting as observers, and in the real sense, they are political party stalwarts during the Ekiti elections. Then also the code of conduct for the observation group will have to be very strict, because some of the challenges that we have people who are biased monitoring some of these elections, even on behalf of groups who are non-partisan. And this creates a lot of challenges in terms of what the results, in terms of what the kind of information that we actually put out there for people.
Mrs. Hassan, still on you. Now, you just talked about how, I know reports have it that INEC turned down some observers which are allegedly to be part of some political parties. Now, from what you are saying, for civility to thrive, if we must ensure credibility of these elections and also ensure that observers do their jobs appropriately in observing the elections, we have just few days to go. Now, how should political parties conduct themselves? What should be in place to ensure that observers do their jobs well and the electoral process thrive according to the rule of law?
In terms of the observers, I think we have to raise what the minimum criteria will be. They must show the track record. They must show evidence of where their funding is actually coming from. They must even show evidence that they've actually been doing democracy and election work, not just some group come out some few weeks to the elections and they claim to be observers. And we should even look at their footsteps, because, if the footprints, determining the footprints of organizations is quite easy if we really want to do that. Then on the part of the political parties, I think the code of conduct, the code of conduct they've signed on to, we must ensure that they actually adhere to it. It's not just going to be the work of the peace committee, but importantly, the work of Nigerians themselves, because they need a Nigerian to govern over post-election. And with the way things are actually coming up in several parts of the country, it gives room for concern, particularly with the challenge of insecurity that is already ongoing in several parts of the country. It means that we have to work double the work for peace.
Thank you very much indeed. And as she was doing her analysis of the situation, we just got Professor Antonia Taye Okosi Sebin. She is actually the INEC National Commissioner, Elections and Party Monitoring. Madam, good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to the program.
Good morning.
All right, let me now ask you this question, which I already put to Idayat, and that has to do with some regulations that INEC, has brought in with respect to the 2019 elections. Why should there be restrictions or change in admitting, the observers, especially local observers, for the election?
Okay, I'm not aware of any major changes that is being referred to. However, we do have criteria for accreditation of observers. Arising from the experiences that we have had in the past, usually we have a large number of groups seeking to observe elections, and there's no way we can admit all of them. particularly because some may not have had any experience, but they may be working for certain groups or organizations. So the criteria helps us to determine those that we will admit, those that we would accredit, and those that we would not allow to come on board, especially, like you said, the local observers.
Okay.
Now, from what Idayat had said, the Oshu experience actually exposed some who pretended to be observers, who also turned out to be party stalwarts. Does INEC have that on their record?
That's the point. We also discovered that, you know, and we want to take more stringent measures now to ensure that we really go through properly to determine those who are actually genuine and those who are not. And we're also, one of the new things is to ask groups to sign indemnity forms such that after the process, if we discover that probably the kits that we give to them have been loaned out to political parties or some other groups that have any untoward interests, we would be able to take action against them.
Okay, Professor, still on you. Now, I know recently INEC has revised the guidelines for observers. Can you let us into the content on what is obtained? What are the criteria for these observers?
In terms of the revision of the guidelines for observation, there wasn't major revision. We changed the title of the document. We try to remove repetitions. We try to include what we have just included, the issue of online accreditation. I mean, online application for accreditation, which was not there before. Before, you only downloaded the form, completed it, and submitted it in the office. Now you can submit online and get your response online, and probably even submit the list of your team members also online. So a lot of these things to be done online. That is new. That is part of what we have in the new revision. But in terms of the criteria for accreditation, experience is very important. We don't want groups, for instance, unless on very special occasions. We don't want groups to come and use the general elections as a learning process. If you have never done it, you have never done a small election, by-election, a rerun, things like that, we don't want you to come on board. We want you, if you're a domestic observer, you must be properly registered and recognized by the Corporate Affairs Commission, for instance, or any other organization that we find reputable in the country. And the objectives of your organization must be indicated in that registration. There are some groups that are clearly political. From their name, from the profile that you see, definitely they cannot come on board. A lot of this will be hiding. You know, they will be hiding under something else to be able to do that. Another criteria is that your work must, a priori, have been related to the work of the commission. You must be into governance issues, elections, human rights, social inclusion, and so on. We don't want an organization that is purely humanitarian. Maybe a humanitarian one will be working in the IDP voting centers. That might be allowed, but we don't want, when you are into hunger or food issues, to now want to apply for accreditation for observation. Or if you are into strategic studies, for instance, please leave the election observation to those who know what it is about and what they need to do on that day.
I think, Ruth, this has already become a kind of business for some people who just organize themselves, bear one name, register it, and of course go for, election monitoring. Now, what we know today as election observation actually is like a second generation of election monitoring, which has become comprehensive. And I recall in 1989 when we had the popular Namibia election. After that was when it actually came down to Africa, as a means of determining the authenticity or credibility of any election. And of course, Africa has continued with that, up to today. But the question I want to ask is this, and I want the lecturer here to answer that question. But how has election monitoring helped in bringing about a stable democracy on the continent, especially the West African sub-region?
Well, I mentioned before, if you recall, that the reports of election observers in regard to 2007 elections in Nigeria instigated the government to accept the outcry for political reform. And I think in several other West African countries, we have had the same situation. I would say, for instance, that the Ghanaians have been getting it very right because they have also benefited from the reports of election observer groups, and ditto the Ivorians. Even though there are certain countries who have been very, very notorious, even within the West African sub-region, their election process has not been exactly commendable. But I think in the main, election observation has tremendously exposed the democratic processes in the different countries, particularly to the limelight. Observation has also identified lapses, big and small, and respective countries have been up and doing in trying to address the identified lapses. Therefore, to me, election observation has largely been a blessing to the West African sub-region, to Africa as a country, in spite of the lapses here and there, in spite of the inability or even outright refusal of certain countries to get it right.
And Dr. Kari, yes, indeed, observations during elections is one way to strengthen our democracy and help good governance to thrive. But there are challenges, Dr. Kari. We've seen snatching of ballot boxes, intimidation, and all of that. If we must enjoy the dividends of our democracy and for the system to thrive effectively, how do we cover up those loopholes, those challenges, to ensure that it goes smoothly?
Yeah, election is a stakeholder thing. There are several organizations, official and unofficial bodies, and even individuals that must all work in concert for a democratic process to be right. The key stakeholders, in particular, political parties, the electorate, and the elections management body must all do what they are supposed to do for us to address, for instance, the issue that you raised of ballot box snatching, which to me has become a thing of the past in Nigeria, because right now, if you snatch a ballot box, it's not going to help you. The reforms that we have witnessed in Nigeria, particularly between 2011 and 2015, have rendered ballot box snatching useless. But in order for election to be right, as I mentioned, all the relevant stakeholders must do what they are supposed to do. The political parties must truly be democratic. They must organize free, fair, and credible primaries. They must come up with candidates that emerge through democratic means. They should also strictly adhere to their own party guidelines. they should also be conversant and also strictly adhere to the electoral process. I mean, the Electoral Act and the 1999 Constitution are severally amended. INEC, as election management body, must also do its work of organizing election within the framework of the law. The electorate should respect constitutional authority. They should conduct themselves before, during, and after election very well. And all candidates and their parties should demonstrate good sportsmanship and accept the verdicts of the electorate. So it's a comprehensive thing. It's an all-encompassing thing. If we all do that, I can assure you we'll have free, fair, transparent, and credible election, and observers are going to judge the polls as such.
All right. Thank you indeed. We'll be taking a short break, but before we do that, I would like us to lose the trajectory of the question I put to the lecturer a short while ago. And I'd like to bring in Idayat Hassan for that particular question because she is the director of Center for Democracy and Development. Now, madam, does election monitoring help in bringing about a stable democracy in nations that have, of course, used observers in conducting their elections? You recall the election in Kenya between Kenyatta and his opponent. Well, there were election observers. Their reports, were put out, yet the opponent did not accept that report. And of course, it nearly degenerated, into a huge crisis. Now, what I'm asking is this: have we really learned from observers' reports after elections, in different states in Africa?
I think observer reports has become very useful because, one, it gives citizens the confidence that what transpired is the actual reflection of their own will. That is what we cannot take away. And if you look at what is happening at Congo DRC today, while they are waiting for the elections, everybody is waiting for the Senate to declare the elections. But more and more people are looking towards the Catholic Church and what they are saying that, look, we know who the winner is, and we need you, Senate, to, that is the election management body, to proclaim the winner. So either you wait or not, but it means a lot to the people. And it also helps the election management body in terms of confirming that this is the true reflection of the results. So it's a two-way thing. It's not just about the people, the contestants in the elections, but it also gives validity to the election management body. So that, okay, this is what has transpired, this is the result, and the observers have confirmed it. And importantly, the role of domestic observers is something that we cannot actually joke with. Because most of these observer group, apart from the ones at the national level, they have a form of legitimacy where they are operating. So either at their local government, at their state government, at the state level, they are able to calm any form of brain nerves. And that is why you see that in most countries, even here in Nigeria, people use the Labour Congress, the churches, the mosque, aside the civil society organizations in terms of monitoring elections.
Mrs. Idayat Hassan, she's the Director, Center for Democracy and Development. Thank you so much for your contributions. If we can get to you again, we'll come back. But for now, thank you so much. Let's go on a break. We'll be back.
Why don't you people sell imported materials here? As beautiful as the shop is.
Auntie, buying foreign goods does not help our economy. Neither does it boost local production. And the good thing is Nigerian-made products are high quality. Really? And to make Nigeria great again. That is why I only sell made in Nigeria products. Because change begins with me.
I'm convinced. Change begins with me too. Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Nigerians. Suicide bombers are not spirits. They are not ghosts. They are human beings like you and me. They live amongst us. They are your neighbors. They are your friends today, but terrorists tomorrow. So you must know your neighbor now. Security begins with you and me. Know your neighbor. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects, and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me.
If you see something, say something. Nigeria, unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, thank you for being there. And now let's turn to Rauf Salami once more. Rauf, a situation where observers of an election, of course we have noted here that we have the EU, AU, Commonwealth, and many other international organizations involving themselves in elections. And a situation where the reports differ from different organizations. What should be done?
Well, there was lesson drawn from the Kenya experience, and since then, there is more collaboration between international observation missions. And the common practice is that before election, all the head of missions meet and compare notes, exchange information, and if there's need for joint declaration to call for peace or appease the tension, it's done. So it's done collectively. Of course, in each region, it's led by the regional body, in this case, ECOWAS. And after election, before any statement, they meet again to compare, discuss, agree before any pronouncement. And the rule is that, okay, ECOWAS will make a preliminary declaration in first, then followed by, and the same thing happens for mediation. If there's need for mitigation or mediation, all the head of missions are together. We saw it in Sierra Leone, we saw it in Liberia, in Mali, to have the parties agree on the best way to do things. And it appears that it's just because everybody wants to win, everybody has its own agenda, and to get them to agree. And the EMB is in between, attacked by all parties. So there's need for a third party from outside to come in and mediate. So and that's also the mandate of ECOWAS.
So what you're saying in effect is that election observation should be seen as a multifaceted international effort to also seek peace in nations.
There are separate declarations. Each mission has its responsibility and its statement. Now, election observation today, as we see it in this region, is also a conflict prevention measure. It's not only to go and observe and report and say that it was credible. It's to follow the process, accompany the process, and help the process. So ECOWAS has that in its mandate, but the ordinary observer is not supposed to make statements, be it a national citizen observer or international observer. So if I were here as ECOWAS observer deployed to Nigeria, technically I'm not allowed to speak in a studio, but only the head of mission is the porte-parole. He will make statement during the whole process. So observers are limited. They don't interfere. They don't give instruction. They look. They're everywhere. They are trained and professional. They have good eyes. And their presence is deterrent, as my colleague said, for any attempt for fraud or malpractice. So it's necessary.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Salami. Let's get to Professor Okosi now. I know from reports, you know, observers have given over the years to improve our electoral process has, you know, has added value to the electoral processes. But taking a clue from other countries, now if we must be in tune, if we must, you know, raise the standards and the benchmark on how elections to be in tune with best global practices, how much effort is INEC doing to improve on the electoral processes? Because we have 40 days to go. What has been done?
Well, I believe the Commission has done a lot, not just in the last 3 years, but since 2011, there have been tremendous improvement in the processes of the Commission, the introduction of the smart card reader, the improvements to the performance of the smart card reader, because when it was first introduced, it was different from how it was used, for instance, in the last set of by-elections. We have improved various parts of it. The processes of capture are different. So there are many areas that we have improved. We have said that we're not using incident forms. We were using incident forms before. Now we're not using them again. This is an improvement. We have cut the time for the time spent during voting by almost half. Before you accredited and came back to vote. Now you do both at the same time, and you leave or stay if you want. There have been tremendous improvement, and I must say that the election observers have been particularly useful in bringing about a lot of the changes that have come on board. They help us in the performance of our statutory duties. And for that reason, we will always welcome them. We are also daily adding on to the innovations that we have. We're enhancing the processes. We would like somebody other than us to come in and say, this is good or this is not good enough. And that is why we will always welcome and continue to admit observers. I raised the point earlier about one of the criteria is that you give us a report. You know, even for organizations that have been involved in election observation, some don't bother to give a report. So what's the point of going on the field if you will not end up saying what you saw? Some give a report, but they don't give it the publicity that it requires. Or they don't identify the stakeholders. Like my colleague said, there are many stakeholders in this election process. They don't identify the stakeholders that relate to certain issues. I'm saying, for instance, all the issues, any problems are put at the doorstep of the election management body, whereas some may be for other stakeholders in the electoral process. So when you write a report, you don't give it to us or you don't let the world know about it, then it's probably not so useful. We're also concerned about the funding sources of observer groups. Where do they get their funds from? You know, they give us documentation, but when an organization is sponsored by a party or by politicians, it will not remain impartial when it is making its observations. I would also like to make a clarification that we do at the Commission. we talk about election observation. It's different from election monitoring. Monitors for us are commission, staff, and agents who go around to see that the processes are going as they should. So I can get there. I can be a monitor. I can get there and see that something is not right, and I can ask the poll official to change it. But an observer is essentially there to see, to look at the level of compliance and to understand that there are ways for reporting such to the election management body, either immediately or in their reports. So an observer cannot, should not intervene in the process during elections.
So there are certain boundaries they shouldn't cross.
But they can make reports available, because one really wonders, when we try to separate monitoring from observing, because they are used interchangeably. But I think for ease of doing your business, you wanted the word monitoring, because at the end of the day, observers write their reports, and a monitor is your own explanation. It really means that when you observe and see something going wrong, you can report, you can take action. Taking action immediately is the different from what you have painted. But I want to ask you this again. As the INEC National Commissioner, Elections and Party Monitoring, that means that your job started a long time ago, as a kind of pre-preparations or pre-arrangement, for the elections. Now, what has your observation been like, in the past, considering that you're monitoring the parties, you have just spoken about funding of observers that may come from parties and all of that. So how prepared are you?
How prepared are we for
the election, vis-a-vis your own portfolio of monitoring party and the elections?
We are on course with regards to our preparations. The timetable and schedule of activities for the elections has 14 activities. We're right now on the 10th/11th, and none of them has shifted date in the way we line them up. The process is ongoing. With regards to today, for instance, is the date that we said we're going to hand the register of voters, the final register of voters to political parties. This activity begins at 10 o'clock today. So things are on course. The accreditation process is open now. Up to the 10th of January, groups still have room to apply for accreditation. So for us,